I'm not feeling my very best physically. I'm not at tip-top shape this afternoon, which is unfortunate as we're having to make the video now. But it's a video that is very important to me because it expresses the love, almost the passion I have for Chinese flower vessels. And in order to explain this affection or passion I have for bronzes, I'm going to just put them in a context. And the context is that the ones that we're going to be looking at for this exhibition mostly come from what we call the Song period, which is the late 10th century to the 13th century in China. And the Song period was, in the time of Marco Polo, who went there in the 13th century, a country which was infinitely more civilized than Europe at the same time, more populous, better governed. It developed probably the quintessential high point of the whole of Chinese art in their great landscape paintings, which are now mostly in the Palace Museum in Taipei. So it was a period of enormous productivity and huge population growth. This period is also associated with a full flowering in China of the concept of the scholar gentleman. He formed part of an elite civil service which not only ran the day-to-day affairs of the empire, but also embodied the high ideals of Confucian culture. And the gentleman scholar, the literatus in China, to me is really the quintessence of the most civilized elite there's ever been in history. And they became that way because they were groomed through a ferocious series of state examinations to not only conform and be trained in ideals of Confucius, but they were trained to be connoisseurs of painting and of calligraphy and of classical literature, even of wine, even how to make conversation in a convivial setting. So we have many paintings of these scholars sitting in beautiful garden pavilions, looking at calligraphy, composing poetry, practicing calligraphy, and having conversations with 2 or 3 friends. It's just a delightful image of a very, very civilized world, la douceur de vivre at its best. Because these are the people who were patrons of the flower vessels that we're going to be looking at. Because so much of the Chinese scholar's life was spent seated at a table, the objects on and around his table were to assume great importance. Hence, beautiful works of art were made, brush pots for brushes, rocks to evoke the mysteries of nature, incense burners and flower vases, all to promote a mood of intellectual and spiritual refinement. And I'm going to start with a bronze, which is intimate and small as it is. I'm going to start with it because it defines really what I think is so meaningful to people about the aesthetics of the Song dynasty. This comes from the 12th century in China, and it is a bronze flower vessel. It's very small, it's very intimate, it's for the scholar's table, and it's been stripped of all decoration. In this case, there is no decoration, and it coincides with much of the other work being done in China at the time, in lacquer and in porcelain, where everything has been simplified down to the raw form. A little bit later, but at the same Song period, you get a bronze which, again, simple in form, in basic form, but it has an addition of the 2 elephant head handles. And it also begins to have references to the classical past, China's classical past. It has dragon heads and other decorative features which belong to the ancient archaic bronzes in China. And these are therefore hints for what type of period in the past this bronze is referring to. And then you get a little bit later in the 14th century, still literati aesthetic, very sober, very simple, very pure. But here they've begun to add on a little bit of decoration. Here, gilding, which they've set into the bronze. In this case, dragon head handles. But again, fundamentally, staying with these beautiful, simple shapes. There's a slight deviation to this theme, because here is a bronze also of the Song period, which is, again, the shape is very simple, but it here unusually has many different areas of decoration. And again, they are all hinting at links to the past. Literati wants these bronzes to be linked to the past in some way, but not too obviously. And then we go back to this bronze, which is a blend of the two. A great emphasis on form, beautiful shape, and again, just two bands of these references to the past. Life changed to some extent in the subsequent Ming dynasty, which reigned from 1368 to 1644, and initiated a period of energetic nationalism and renewed self-confidence, which gave rise to an era in art and taste and manners in which the sophistication of the Song gave way to a more robust and realistic aesthetic, leading to a more flamboyant style. While this was the case in general, bronzes, unlike porcelains, were slow to adapt to the new fashion, and scholars, at least for long, continued to cherish the old models. So this, in fact, is an example of a really different style, where there's still an effort to keep to the simple style of the Song to some extent, but the dimensions have increased and the decoration has increased quite substantially and become much more robust, much more realistic. So the whole thing has become much more flamboyant, in line with the change in taste in the Ming period from the 16th century for a couple of hundred years. But there's enough there for the scholar still to be interested in finding some association with the classical past of China. Here you've got a Japanese bronze made in the 1940s, last century, by a master craftsman in Japan. And here he is taking the form which goes right back in Chinese history to the archaic bronzes, long before the Song. He's made it green. That evokes the whole theme of archaeological bronzes which have been taken out of the ground. And he's added here splashes of gilding. And that is a reflection of early bronzes which have retained their gilding. And sometimes when bronzes are excavated, patination can be very beautiful and green like this, but often there's still traces of gilding, which is rather lovely when it happens. And this is what he's referring to. So here you have a bronze 1940s going right back to archaic Chinese era of thousands of years before Christ, remodeled in the Sung period, which has taken this form and others and stripped away all the decoration that existed before. Some of the decoration here now put back by the Japanese to make it very different. It is obviously a Japanese bronze. And what this shows in nucleus is that there's a narrative continuation between the early Chinese civilization and last century in Japan. And also, of course, this was affected by bronzes coming in Europe. The world changed in Europe as well. Aesthetics changed in the 1890s because of the influx of bronzes and other works of art from Japan. So the whole importation was called Japonisme because they couldn't distinguish at that point whether things were Japanese or Chinese. Most of the things that came in from Japan were Chinese, and many of them were of the Song period that we'd be looking at. And so those bronzes and those artifacts and those paintings and prints had an enormous effect on the development of Art Nouveau, and Art Nouveau had a great effect on Art Deco, and Art Deco had a great effect on bronzes made in the 1940s last century. Here we have a bronze from the 2nd century BC, and here you have in essence everything that was transferred over the next 1200 years to the Song period. Simplicity of form, a form which has been part of the repertoire of Chinese artists ever since till the 20th century. These were shapes developed by the Song which have changed the whole character of Chinese culture, and their forms which are some of the most beautiful shapes in the world, like the electric light bulb or the mini minor. And so here you have, interestingly, a glimpse of the earlier original gilding. We have much evidence of the scholar's lifestyle in the numerous treatises written in the 16th and 17th centuries on fashion and taste, known as handbooks of elegant living. They defined what the cultured gentleman should surround himself with in his study. The most complete of these is the so-called Treatise of Superfluous Things, which describes objects essential to the life of the scholar, offering in particular guidance on flower vases and flower arrangement. And it goes like this. In spring and winter one should use bronze. In autumn and summer, porcelain. In the main hall, one should use large vases. and in the library, small ones. Vases with ring handles should be avoided, as should matching pairs. Bronze and porcelain are to be valued, gold and silver definitely not. Slender, elegant vases are appropriate, elaborate ones are not. I have enjoyed Chinese flower vases for nearly 50 years. They are the most intimate of works of art, evoking the image of a venerable scholar in his studio hundreds of years ago, quietly savouring the freshness of the flowers amid the subtle hints of China's classical past, millennia older. And as one holds these beautiful objects, which have been handled for centuries, their colour and patination assuming a poetic richness through human contact, we cannot but be moved by they evoke culture that achieved such great heights, but is now long gone.